On the front cover goes like this: the cell door opened and a lieutenant of the KGB security police looked in. "Get ready," he said, "and fast." I had no sooner put on my jacket than the door opened again. "Come on." He hurried me down the prison corridor and handed me over to the warden, who led me into his office. A tall, heavy-set man stood up behind the desk and said, "I am Chairman Andropov of the KGB." Mr. Krasin, welcome to these microphones. I don't know how far back to go to get a good running start on your story. Where should we begin? Would it be when you were a baby under Stalin? Should it be at the end of World War II, which you might barely remember? Should it be under Khrushchev? Where would you begin the real story if you had every bit as much time and space to tell it in as you did inside the New York Times?
Well, I would start from the 1949, when I was arrested the first time, being 19 years old boy and a student of philosophy in Moscow University. In my second course...
Stalin was still in power.
Oh, yes. It was 1949, and Stalin died in 1953, so about 5 years before his death. And it's a very interesting story because it shows how they arrested at that time. We were just boys and girls who gathered together just to discuss the problems, to better understand the Soviet reality. Of course, as young people, we were interested in everything, in philosophy, in Marxism-Leninism, to understand better, is it true or not? What was socialism to our country? And there were signs that socialism failed. It was not real socialism. And what the revolution made to our country, and why a lot of people were arrested and died in concentration camps, like my father in 1937. Also...
a Soviet concentration camp.
Yes, Soviet concentration. They call it labor camps, but you can call it either way. Well, just we gathered together 10, 12 boys and girls in some private apartment, and we never suspected that from the very beginning we were followed by the KGB.
Now, did you know in 1949 that, as you call 10 boys and girls getting together in somebody's apartment to discuss the reality of the Soviet Union and the problems of the world was a frighteningly illegal act?
No, it was not illegal. It was just what the authorities didn't want. And we didn't realize that at that time. We gathered more than 2 years. Sometime almost every day. It was so interesting. It was just a club for discussions, you know.
Did anybody know anything? 1949 was real Stalinist Iron Curtain. There were no exchange visits. There weren't even the delegations that began in the mid-1960s.
Yeah, it was Cold War.
Yeah.
Yeah, but at that time we didn't realize that. We were just 17, 18 years old boys and girls.
Did you realize that life was materially better in the West? Did somebody get a letter through the Red Cross from an aunt in Chicago who had an electric refrigerator? Did you have any information about that?
Yes, we had, but not much, of course, because the Soviet newspapers published only lies, you know. But still we understood, of course, that the Western life is much higher than in the Soviet Union, but it was not the most important problem for us. We were looking for some spiritual problems. Material problems don't bother people when they are 17 years old. What is freedom? What is the justice? Is our country a real socialist country or not? Or it is some kind of false socialism, you know? And theoretical problems of philosophy and sociology and so on and so on. And it continued more than 2 years, about 3 years. And we were closely followed and watched. They, one guy who was a KGB informer,
In your group?
was put in our group. It was not so difficult because we were not hiding. Everybody could bring everybody, you know. Sometimes we guessed maybe up to 20 youngsters. And always somebody brought somebody with him, you know, some friends. And this guy got acquainted with some of our guys and began to participate in our meetings and reported everything, especially on political topics. And in January 49, we were arrested, 7 of us, 6 boys and 1 girl, and accused under the Article 58, which was the only one political article under Stalin law. Had a lot of paragraphs in anti-Soviet propaganda. The main accusation was criticism of Marxism-Leninism from idealistic positions. And more specifically, they accused us that we criticized the Soviet, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, the policy of the Communist Party, and that's not enough. It was enough. You know, after 7 months of investigation, we were sentenced to 8 years of imprisonment.
Wow. Now, just let me stop and keep trying to relate this to something we Americans can understand. Teenagers getting in trouble with the law is not new to us. We understand that. Now, our teenagers do not get in trouble with the law by criticizing Marxism, Leninism from an idealistic point of view. They don't get in trouble with the law by cussing out the President of the United States or by writing anti-American slogans on the schoolroom blackboard. But they get in trouble in other ways. They start fights, they smash their cars into other cars, and they do all kinds of awful things. When an American teenager gets in trouble, he calls his parents from the jail and says, "I'm in jail." And the father calls his lawyer, and they come down together and they postpone. When we get back together, I want to know what it's like when you're a teenager in the Soviet Union and get in trouble for criticizing Marxism, Leninism from an idealistic standpoint. Introduce me to Victor Krasin, and I'm proud to introduce him to you. An unusual cover for the New York Times Sunday magazine, How I Was Broken by the KGB. This was in spring 1984, and there's Victor Krasin's face. How I Was Broken by the KGB made brilliant reading. It is making very brilliant and important listening. Right?
Yeah, and you have to realize, maybe you don't know, that in the Soviet Union, up to now, you have no lawyer under investigation, only in court. And you cannot communicate to anybody except your investigator.
You can't call your parents and say,
No, well, forget about this. You cannot call, you cannot write a letter, you cannot meet anybody, even a lawyer is prohibited, is not permitted to defend you during the investigation. You are helpless. Absolutely. Your investigator always is a very experienced man who understands everything and how to break you. And if one investigator is not enough, they will give 2, 3, 4, as many as necessary. And you are a boy of 18, 19 years old, accused in political, crime, and you have no means how to defend yourself. So it's one of the reasons why they break people so easy, because you don't know anything. You don't know how to defend yourself. You cannot communicate to anybody. You are in the cell with the people, your cellmates, who also are broken already, and tell you that there's no sense to resist. And it's really no sense to resist. It was in Stalin years at least, because despite of your resistance, even if you try to resist, they give you the same term. But your situation in prison will be much worse. They don't permit you to buy food even if you have money. They don't permit you to read books. They put you in solitary confinement. You will be just alone. If necessary, they beat you. And so the mood at that time, I mean, in 1949, was so terrible. Everybody understood that the term is inevitable. They give you as much as they want. 8 years, 10 years, 15 years, 25 years.
So they gave you how many years?
8.
Did you serve 8 years?
No, I served actually 6. About 6.
But you did serve 6 years.
6 years just for nothing.
For criticizing Marxism-Leninism as a teenager.
Just for I was a member of some discussion club, let's say this way.
Were you giving envelopes to people from the American embassy? Were there...
No, we didn't mean we never even discussed such problems like to communicate to some foreigners.
Espionage.
For foreigners, at that time, you would get 25 years, not 8, you know. I knew then when I was in the camps, I met some guys who tried to establish some relations with the foreigners, and it was 25, not 8. 8 was a small term at that time, maybe the smallest, because the majority of the population of the camps was divided approximately in 2 equal halves, 10 years and 25 years. And those who had 10 were called little termers. Short termers, yeah. And 25 were like big termers.
Mm-hmm.
So 8 years was very rare term.
A baby term.
Baby term, exactly, you know.
Baby turn for a baby crime.
Yeah.
Okay.
By the way, we didn't have a court. We just were. They just told us. It was such a form. It was a special committee, something like a committee under the KGB chairman, which made decisions and sentences without your presence.
Well, no, wait. Isn't there a Soviet Constitution that guarantees you a trial? The Soviet Constitution is a beautiful document.
Oh, yes. But you should know that the Soviet Constitution, as they say, exists only for foreigners, not for the Soviet people. And when they decide, and everything is under instructions by telephone. Even if the article under which they accused you is up to 5 years, suppose, but they want to give you 10 years, they will change the article, that's all. Right. Just one telephone call from somebody, big party boss, who will tell the judge, well, what is it, 5 years, it's not enough. Give him 10. And the judge will change your article, that's all. It's very easy. You know, everything is only the instructions. Instructions by phone, by those people who make decisions.
Has any group of American lawyers invited you to speak about justice in the Soviet Union?
Well, I spoke much later when I became a dissident in the 60s and 70s. I spoke much to the Western correspondents. Because I could speak English. By the way, I learned English by myself.
How?
Through the radio, BBC, English lessons through the radio.
They gave English lessons to Russian-speaking people?
To also everywhere, and you can listen to BBC in the Soviet Union, in English, of course, not in Russian. In Russian, they jam. And that was the reason. After several years of listening to this jamming, fighting with those, with the jamming, I decided to spend some time and to try to learn English language, to listen to English radio.
I'm so glad you did.
And I did. I spent more than 2 years, every day, spending maybe 4 to 6 hours. And after the first year, I could understand. After 2 years, I could speak. And that's why I became one of the dissidents who were in constant contacts with the Western correspondents, mainly American.
In 1949, for 8 years, Stalin died when you were in prison.
Yes.
What happened in the prison the day Stalin died?
I was in the camp at that time. It was the most remote camps in the Soviet Union. In far northeast, the gigantic area, which may be equal to the whole Western Europe, which is called Kolyma.
Near Yakutsk?
More farther than Yakutsk, close to Alaska, bordering Alaska. It's the main gold-producing area in the Soviet Union. Maybe 90% of the Soviet gold is made in this area, and also many rare metals like uranium and so on. I personally was in uranium mines. Well, at that time, it was in March '53. It was amazing, you know. We worked with some free people together. It was a big electric power station which under construction. And there were about 3,000 of prisoners and maybe 1,000 of free people working together. We lived separately, of course. We lived in the camp. They lived in the settlement. But we worked together. And we had some friends among those free people. Many of them were former prisoners, those free people, who served their terms and then stayed in this area because they were not permitted to leave this area. And sometime we made some job instead of those guys. They earned money. We didn't. They didn't pay prisoners. We worked only for a piece of bread and a plate of soup, that's all. And always were hungry. And those guys, they helped us. Sometimes they had money, they bought some bread and brought some bread. It was prohibited, of course, but they did. And I had one guy, I was very friendly to him, and he was very friendly to me. And we noticed that day that they didn't work. They gathered as a group, speaking, and they didn't want to talk to us. I got this guy and asked him, what happened? What happened? The war? He said, no. And he was so afraid, you know, scared to tell me truth. And I noticed a newspaper in his pocket. And I got this.
You grabbed the newspaper?
Yeah, I grabbed the newspaper. And I saw the portrait of Stalin in black frame. And he was so scared. He told me, don't tell anybody.
You mean he feared he'd be punished if he told you what was on the front page of his own newspaper?
Yes.
In the Soviet Union, their own newspaper?
Yeah, but in the camp, we didn't receive newspapers. And he was afraid that he could be punished for that. That he just told me that Stalin died, you know. It shows how that the fear was the most important feeling for the Soviet people at that time.
Hold it. We'll get back together. I want to know what happened when the word spread throughout the labor camp that the man who sent you there, Joseph Stalin, was no longer with us. Stalinist camp officials would not even let you know that Stalin was dead. They were afraid that would give you too much pleasure.
Yeah, well, then, of course, I immediately told everybody, or maybe a couple of hundred of guys who worked together with me in this shop. It was a metal shop for repair and everything, you know. So a lot of people worked together with me, and I told everybody, and it was a real celebration, you know. And I told this guy, listen, I will work for you. I will do everything you want. Just bring a bottle of vodka. And we will celebrate, And he did. He was scared to death, but he did. He brought, in an hour or so, he brought a bottle of vodka, and we celebrated Stalin's death. It was real relief for everybody. Everybody understood that something should change now.
Exactly. Well, it took 3 years before anything changed, didn't it?
With me, it took only 1 year and a half, because my mother in Moscow was so active. And the other mothers of the other guys, they stormed KGB, insisting that our cases should be reconsidered now. But it took 1 year and a half before our case was reconsidered. We were brought back to Moscow, to the same Lubyanka prison, KGB prison, and the interrogation at this time was only a month. And I was questioned only twice about my first interrogation and the second one, because, by the way, in September 49, just after 2 weeks I was brought in my first camp, I made an escape from the camp.
Oh, no.
Together with 4 guys, my camp mates. It was very, an escape which was very, as we say, very loud escape, with disarmed guards.
Oh, really?
Yeah. In the forest, we were working in sand carrier, loading the truck with the sand, 5 of us, and we disarmed 2 guards, got their guns, and with the truck we escaped. And on the 3rd day, 4 of us were caught. We were terribly beaten to death. And then it was a court, and they gave us 10 years for this escape. They never caught the 5th guy. He disappeared. And nobody knows what happened to him. But, so I had two sentences. The first one, 8 years for my criticizing Marxism-Leninism, and the second one, 10 years for the escape.
You didn't shoot the guards?
No. We were happy, because if we did, they would have killed us without any doubt. Mm-hmm. And it was me who insisted not to kill them.
Good.
Not to make any trouble to those guys. Mm-hmm. We just left them in the forest, got the truck, and made the escape. Mm-hmm. So when they brought me back in September 54, back to Moscow, they just questioned me once about my first sentence and the second time about my second sentence. And that's it. And then they told me 2-3 weeks later that I was rehabilitated and could go home. So it took me 5 years and 9 months to serve the term. And then I was allowed to go home, and they told me, well, what we can do, you are not alone. Millions of people shared the same with you, and I knew this better than theirs, how many people died innocent in concentration camps. So I was back home.
But you had lost 6 years in that early crucial part of your life when you were 18, 19 years old. You lost your college.
Yes, I lost my college. Later I came back to the college. It was Moscow University. But still I lost about 6 years. And it was a terrific experience.
When you go to jail in America, I'm thinking now from a male point of view, it's not something you usually brag about. It doesn't give you much prestige when you get back home. There's a certain kind of man who brags about having been to jail, and a certain kind of woman who's sort of turned on by all that and sort of, finds it very exciting. when you would meet girls at the canteen or the buffet or wherever it was you met, and they said, hey, Victor, you're a nice guy, but, how come you're so old? you're 6 years older than you ought to be here. Did you say, I was in a labor camp in Siberia? Was that something that helped you with your peers, or was it something that had some shame to it?
No, I didn't tell anybody. I came back to the Moscow University, this time not to the philosophical department, but to economic department. And, of course, I didn't tell anybody, those youngsters who were 6 years younger than me. I never told them why I'm 6 years older than they. In the Soviet Union, you can meet guys, who are 3, 4, 5 years older because they couldn't enter the college or university when they were 18 after graduating from high school, just they had no conditions, they had to work, something like that. So it's no wonder that you can meet in some college, people who are older, but nobody asked me, and I never explained why.
Okay, we'll get back together. Let's take you.
Right. Yeah, and I remember the first exhibition, American exhibition in 1959 in Moscow.
Nixon and everything.
Yeah, big exhibition, and so many people wanted to see it. It was impossible, you had to stay the whole night in line to buy the ticket. I fortunately could visit this exhibition 3 times because I had a friend who could get those tickets where he worked. So it was a real change in the relationship between the Soviet Union and the West. And those years finally produced a big change in the conscience of the Soviet people. They began to understand better the Soviet reality, to understand better the West. They began to seek for the truth and trying to understand what's going on in our country. And finally, in the middle 60s, so-called human rights movement appeared in the Soviet Union. The first people who began to fight for the human rights, for dignity, for the possibility to openly speak and express their opinion, our point of view. First of all, of course, on those the most painful problems, like when they arrested somebody again for people's convictions and accused somebody for under political accusations. It was, as I said, the most painful point for the Soviet intelligentsia because we suffered so much under Stalin. So when they arrested somebody for, spreading some literature or openly expressing his opinion, criticizing something in the Soviet Union, we began to protest against this, to write the letters to the Soviet authorities expressing that we don't agree with such practice and trying to remind them that such practice was just 3, 4, 5 years ago under Stalin. And that we are against this, and we insist that this case is not a true case, that somebody was accused, not just, and so on. And that's how this moment started, in the middle of 60s. And I began one of the participants of this movement. We circulated all those letters and documents, first in Moscow, then in some other cities like Leningrad and Kiev and Kharkov And a lot of people wanted to get those papers, to read those papers, and very quickly we got friends everywhere.
Now, this is what they call samizdat, which means self-publishing.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. We had no means to officially publish our documents, but we always had some girls who could make it through typewriter, 5 copies, 10 copies, 20 copies, and this way we were circulating those documents in Moscow, in some other cities, and then began to pass those documents to the Western correspondents.
Was this under Khrushchev, or was Brezhnev already in power?
Yeah, it was, Khrushchev was dismissed already. It was Brezhnev. But, the situation under Brezhnev, the first years, let's say late 60s and the beginning of 70s, didn't change much comparatively to the Khrushchev years. The changes came, but gradually, and so we were under very heavy pressure. KGB followed us, especially the most active people, every day. I, for instance, was followed every day from the morning till night.
Okay, hold the line. It is so valuable. We may not know of the dozens or the hundreds or the thousands or the tens of thousands or the millions of victims of Soviet oppression. But when we know of one who speaks so articulately, was it Eleanor Roosevelt who first said, better to light a candle than curse the darkness? Well, with the kind of candle Victor Krasin is lighting, the communists are going to cuss the daylight out of the light that he's shedding. Victor, go ahead now. You are now being followed again. I can see why the young romantics who believe that Khrushchev is liberalizing and they're going to make Brezhnev continue liberalizing like Khrushchev, I can see them circulating illegal publications and self-publications and human rights and let's have a democracy in the Soviet Union. But you had been put away as a teenager for 6 years for criticizing Marxism-Leninism. You knew that the Soviet Union meant business.
Oh, yes.
So I'm amazed that you went back into that again.
Well,
I'm amazed and impressed. Let me put it that way.
I tell you honestly, it was a big question for me. The first time when I got acquainted with those young people who started this human rights movement in the Soviet Union, it was a challenge for me. It was a question. I realized much better than those guys what is a threat. They didn't realize completely because they never been in jail. But still, I decided for myself that it's my obligation, my duty to help them, Although I realized completely that sooner or later, I would pay for this again.
You knew you were going to pay for it again?
Yeah,
and
sure.
You were willing to?
Yeah, and I decided, okay, if they put me in jail again, I'm ready. I'm prepared for this. Wow. I never knew that they would threaten me with death penalty. Mm-hmm. That's what happened later, and I will touch this question later. But I was prepared. I prepared myself that I will pay with jail for these activities, but I still have to do this. It's my moral duty to help those people who started this movement, who fight for truth, for justice in this country.
I'm glad you had philosophical training. I've had none, but I've still got some philosophical questions. How could these young people, how could you, Victor Krasin, know what freedom was if you'd never had one day of it? And I was looking at it from a free country. It seems to me that if they indoctrinate and inoculate you and just simply pump all this stuff into your head and tell you you're the luckiest man in the world because you live in the Soviet Union, and in the West people are starving, and in bourgeois so-called democracy is nothing but a political Wall Street fraud, and in the Soviet Union is where the worker has achieved his full potential, and aren't you lucky to be the new Soviet man? How did you know any better?
Well, happily, the human soul has a feeling of truth, what is true, what is not true, what is freedom and what is slavery. And people always understand in the depths of their hearts what's going on. They obey, but still they understand that they are slaves.
Stalin for our happy childhood. But at that very time, parents disappeared in camps, in prisons, forever. It was such a time.
Was it your ambition to play for Joseph Stalin?
Yes, it happened once in my life.
You played for Stalin?
Not me personally, but it was a group of maybe 20 or 25 musicians, all violinists, and we played in unison, all together, the same music. And in this group, I was one of the youngest violinists, but at that very time I played Orchestra and Kogan and other famous violinists, and we played in Большой Theater on November 6th evening to celebrate, this revolution date. Mm-hmm. And Stalin was at Большой Theater at that time. So it was a memorable evening,
So you were very happy as a young musician in the Soviet Union at that time?
Yes, yes.
Then came World War II.
Yes.
And you had to put the violin down.
No, they did also a very nice thing. They put this special musical school and part of conservatory, they put inside country. They moved to save, because to stay in Moscow became very dangerous because of bombing.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So they moved our school inside country, in the middle of country.
To Kuibyshev.
Kuibyshev and Penza and Tashkent, so many different places, and they saved children and teachers.
I'm getting all warm. And do what I say and refrain from doing what I say not. How do you instruct a child who's interested in the pure culture, the pure art, the pure music, that there's such a person as Stalin, there's such a mechanism as the Communist Party, and they have rules?
Yeah, it's really very difficult to understand for American people, It's such a big difference, in psychology, in the style of thinking, even. So it's really difficult to explain. But I think the best explanation will be that politics in Russia, they put control on every step, every person, and they have in their hands all power, because only government and party controls and finance everything, theater, arts, everything. So, for example, it's interesting. If writer writes book and government does not like this book, so some American people think, okay, fine, if they don't like, I will publish this book myself, I will pay for this. Mm-hmm. But it's impossible in Russia, because all these printing companies and factories, they completely belong to government. And without government approval, impossible to print even one page. So that's why they pay for theater, for art, for museums. They pay for everything, but they control everything. And they allowed to perform only which supports the communist system, the ideology, the government, and so on and so on.
Mm-hmm. Well, understand the difference between freedom and dictatorship? Let me explain. Adolf Hitler's Nazi Germany had radio stations, so does the United States. Adolf Hitler's radio stations had program directors, so do those of the United States. Those Nazi German program directors had instructions, and so do those in the United States. However, we now meet the difference. In Nazi Germany, those radio program directors were instructed to play music only by German musicians, composers who were not Jewish, and the non-Jewish composers of countries conquered by Nazi Germany. In America, the instructions are play the top 40. That's all, just play the top 40. My partner for the broadcast has transplanted himself from the Soviet Union, another dictatorship, to the United States. He's Lazar Gosman, and he's head of the Soviet Emigre Orchestra. Was there a meeting to decide whether you were going to call it the Soviet Emigre Orchestra or the Russian Emigre Orchestra?
Russia. We still Soviets.
Uh-huh.
You know, this is misleading. Then it's already, some people in orchestra, they 10 years here, and they already American citizens. And I also going to be soon American.
Yay, congratulations.
Thank you. And for whole the rest of my life, to call myself immigrant, you know, I feel a little bit uncomfortable.
Good for you. Good for you.
So that's why we are thinking to.
No, but I think of the whole, big thing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, but in our orchestra is the musicians mostly from Moscow, from Leningrad, and from Odessa. Mm-hmm. Here reunited. And it's very, we're very happy to play in Russia. And I feel like we have to be fair, because even under such a terrible control and censorship, their art, their people create some nice things. And, this control sometimes does not really you feel. Because, for example, if you play Bach or Vivaldi, what kind of control from government? It's nothing. So if you're a good musician, you will play very good Bach or Vivaldi or Purcell. But on the other hand, if you start playing, for example, too much avant-garde music, they will tell you, oh, no, it's wrong, this is dangerous. Or if you will play too much even Russian music and Baroque music, but you will not play Soviet composers, they can accuse you that you're not a good patriot. So it's also dangerous, So you have to be like, this, I don't know how you call in English, мельница, ветряная мельница.
A chameleon.
Yeah, you have to every time feel from what side a wind goes.
Weather vane.
Yes.
Weather vane is the literal meaning of that. Yeah.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
So, and this creates feeling like you're not free to do what you want,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, even with this control, there are a lot of wonderful things in theater, in movie even, in books, and of course, in music, very much.
Rostropovich, in his Voice of America interview, which was quite moving. I'm sorry that there's a law that says the Voice of America can't be heard in the United States. This interview should be replayed in the United States so Americans know the difference. Here they're broadcasting it to the Soviet Union. They know the difference between freedom and slavery. Here, a lot of Americans don't. Rostropovich said, they never tell you point blank, I am your commissar, I am your ideological scoutmaster, and I'm telling you it's wrong. Instead, there's nothing direct. They call you in and they say, there is an opinion. There is, that's
Exactly.
there is an opinion. Yeah.
He's wonderful. He precisely expressed what.
And Rostropovich also said, see, the subtle pointing out of differences between freedom and totalitarian dictatorship is so much more valuable than screaming right-wing anti-communism, which sometimes lacks an intellectual core. Now, one of the most anti-communist remarks I've ever heard is Rostropovich saying, I've been in America 7 years, and I wake up in the morning, and I still can't believe that I am going to pick up the phone and schedule my orchestra in Toronto. I don't have to talk to anybody in the Ministry of Culture. I don't have to talk to the czars of music. I don't have to go through the Communist Party bureaucracy. He said, I feel like I'm levitating. I feel like I'm floating over my bed. Imagine the idea of picking up the phone and booking your own orchestra wherever you want to.
The same I experienced, 10 years ago, I got invitation when I was music director of Leningrad Chamber Orchestra. I got invitation from Austria, from Karinthische Sommer Festival. And they invited orchestra and Shostakovich to come together, and we supposed to play his 14th symphony. And it's supposed to be grand opening of this festival, and Krasin has to be there, and all this was arranged. But I have to ask government, and they have to ask government. And government, they were very difficult to make this decision. So at last they decided, yes, they told, yes. But in the last moment, they said no.
Oi.
So, and now, 10 years later, I got invitation from this very festival.
Wow.
And I said yes, and I don't have to ask anybody to go to this festival, I did not ask American government, I did not ask anybody. I only asked Dmitry Shostakovich, grandson of composer, would you mind to go with us and play music, your grandfather's piano concerto? And he said, of course, I will go. And so we simply bought tickets, and we went to this festival, and we played there, and it was great success, and everybody was happy. This is a very clear difference. Yes, it's very familiar, because I traveled with the Soviet musicians, with the Leningrad Philharmonic Orchestra, where I worked for 27 years. And this orchestra used to go abroad every year, almost every year. And we visited many countries, almost all countries in Europe, except maybe Portugal. And we visit also America twice. We played here in America with Leningrad Philharmonic Orchestra. And we went to Japan maybe 6 or 7 times. So I traveled a lot. And of course, every time we had some people who do not play instrument at all. And also among musicians, also some people who supposed to, we call them stukach, stukach, from the word stuchать, or knock in the door. So when he knocks in the door, so he come to office KGB, and he tells something what he learned, about somebody. So, and it happened that this traveling became, first of all, it's very important for Russian people to go abroad. First of all, you see the world. And many Russians are very anxious to go out and simply see, what is going on in this terrible West, where they blame, that unemployment and inflation and almost slaves, And to see all this is very interesting, So then, all this process of preparation to go abroad, it's so hard, so difficult. You have to fill up a lot of papers. Then they organize like jury exams. They ask political questions. And
They cross-examine you? They question you before you're allowed to go abroad?
Exactly. And they, for example, I was asked, who is the premier in Uganda at that time? Or why England does not come to common market in Europe?
Well, now wait, why were they asking questions like that? Were you better off knowing or not knowing the answers?
No, the better, no, but from the point of view from Russian communist ideology, to know. You have to know...
Party line.
Yes, party line.
For the cocktail parties afterward when you're going to be conversed with by your colleagues in the West.
Yeah, also they try, how deep this propaganda came into your mind, into your brains, So they would like to know if you really reflect their point of view in economical and political situation in the world. So, and if somebody does not answer, they can tell, you have to learn this, otherwise you will stay home. Orchestra will go. Also, they never allowed to take with you your wife or your children, they have to stay like hostages. Also, for single people who is not married, it's almost impossible to go out because they don't
you have no attachments.
Yes, they don't trust you. You have to leave somebody in Russia.
Even so, there are a lot of defections.
Yes.
Now, I have to know one thing. See, it's such a pleasure in my business to know that you've been wondering about something all your life, and now you're going to get an answer. How frank are they about this? Is it unspoken that your wife and children happen to be left behind in the Soviet Union, or is it, we are afraid you might defect to the West?
No, it's nobody said this, only once, and before, this orchestra leaves country, we were invited to government organization, office, and even sometimes a minister of culture speak to orchestra. And once we went to Moscow, and Minister of Culture, Furtseva, she said...
she's that woman.
Yeah,
I read about her.
Furtseva. Yeah, Furtseva. She made a big speech to the orchestra, and she said, I don't understand why people defecting our country. We have such a wonderful plans, So at that time, they published a 5-year plan for future, So, and it's funny, there are numbers which never, reach, never. But because they have great plans, people don't have right to defect,
When we get... No, I was about to ask a question which...
Life in Russia is not so bad, she said, and everybody started, laughing.
They laughed? Really?
Yeah.
That took courage.
Yeah. So, but, what... later, when I came to this country, I started work with the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra.
Which symphony?
St. Louis Symphony.
St. Louis.
Yeah. My first job was here with the St. Louis Symphony. And next year, orchestra went to Greece on tour. And, it was such a fantastic difference. First of all, it was no exam, political exam, and no papers almost, and we went there. And we stayed in the same hotel when we stayed.
No,
with the
really?
Russian- Yes, and we played almost at that very time, you know. It was a festival in Athens, international, so many orchestras come. So I played on exactly the same stage, you know, in the same place. But what a difference. First of all, my wife came with me, my son from Vienna, and 2 or 3 friends from Austria also came to me visit. Then one friend from Italy also came. And when you travel with a Russian orchestra, you never go to restaurant because you get very little per diems, and you have to save them in order to bring them some souvenirs or things for your relatives who stay with you. But now in Greece, we went, you know, 9 people every time, you know, to restaurant, and we felt so wonderful. Also, when you travel with Russian musicians, you have to go only 4 people together, and they tell with whom you have to go.
In other words, you cannot go with less than 4 people.
Yes. Yeah.
You must have 3 other people with you.
Exactly. And they tell exactly with whom you have to go.
In other words, if one person wants to make a break, there's 3 there to grab him,
Yes.
which also happens.
Yeah. So, and here in Greece, I walk alone, and I walk with my wife, and then I walk with 8 more friends, you know, and relatives. And it was a great difference, you know. So that's why when people ask, why you emigrate, you know, because of this completely big difference.
But wait a minute, I was going to ask the same thing. You in the Soviet Union, as a non-defecting, apparently patriotic Soviet, Russian, communist musician, are a privileged person. We've all seen the Academy Awards. They're our privileged people. They have limousines and chauffeurs, and everybody oohs and ahs, and the orchestra plays for them, and people hand them flowers, and all the sisters are fair, and all the brothers are valiant, and they have their country homes. You were a member of that class in the Soviet Union.
Yes.
Over here, you were an unemployed fiddle player. Now, did it ever occur to you that, hey, look, sure, I like freedom, but there's such a thing as life, and there's such a thing as realism, and there's such a thing as pragmatism, and you got to look at that. I'm staying in the Soviet Union. Did that ever occur to you?
Of course, you know, you have to think because before you make this move. But for me, it was clear. If even I will be unemployed, or I have to struggle, you know, for a piece of bread, anyway, I would go to get this wonderful feeling of freedom and get out of this government control.
Well, thank you and congratulate you for coming.
Thank you.
And let's be fair, I want to congratulate the Soviet Union for progress. I interviewed a Russian sailor in Oslo, Norway in 1956. And I said, how come you're always going around in groups? How come you never, American sailors go off alone? He said, our rules say that we must always stick together in a group of no less than 5. I want to salute the great liberalization in today's Soviet Union. Now, you may walk around, apparently, if you're a Soviet in the West, in a group of only 4. And that just took 30 years. Look what future generations of Soviets in the West have to look forward to. Who knows? Maybe we'll live to see 3. Maybe we'll live to see 3. Meanwhile, congratulations to Lazar Gosman and the Soviet Emigre Orchestra. Same thing with Fidel Castro. I say, hooray, Jesse. I say, let me laugh because we have the last laugh because we have Lieutenant Goodman. Let me laugh the last laugh because we have the prisoners in Cuba. Let me laugh the last laugh because we have the El Salvador rebels sitting down. But let's not impute diplomatic skill to Jesse Jackson. Let's say, congratulations, Jesse, because of who you are and what you are, you could pull it off.
Yes.
And wish you all again.
To you both.
All right, now, wait. I don't want to say this behind your back. Our difference of opinion is this. We agree that what Jackson hath wrought is noble and good. You are saying it was diplomatic skill. Jesse Jackson sat down, and because of the cut of his jib or the sparkle in his eye or the power of his hand, Jesse Jackson pulled it off. I'm saying that Jesse Jackson is the most anti-administration of the three candidates.
Well, you all know that,
Okay, so in order for dictators like Assad of Syria and Castro of Cuba, in order for people who run dictatorial regimes to humiliate the United States, Jesse Jackson is a gift. He's the ideal dartboard upon which to jab Uncle Sam, because that prisoner didn't go to the American ambassador. He went to Jesse Jackson personally. I say hooray for that, but all I'm saying, ma'am, is that you can call it playing a situation, but you cannot call it diplomatic skill. And I fear you're thinking, you scare me. I fear that millions of Americans are going to suppose, they're going to impute these skills to Jesse Jackson, and Jesse will join me in laughing at those millions of deluded people. Impute the marvelous things that happen when Jesse Jackson visits a place to his power, and how many realize he's being used by forces who want an excuse to do a certain act anyhow, to make Jackson look good, to play hob with the American political process, to strengthen what Jackson stands for in this country.
Well, person of Dr. Hallberg, perhaps he could prescribe some corrective lenses for the country in terms of perspective on world terrorism. It's disheartening for me to see that in the press we have such a naive view of what's going on. And when we have a contender for the Democratic candidacy for the presidency consorting openly with international terrorists, such as Fidel Castro, I certainly wouldn't describe him as a Jeffersonian Democrat. When we have... Pardon?
Definitely not.
And when we have his good right hand in the form of Dr. Farrakhan proceeding to go forth and visit such other liberal thinkers as Muammar Gaddafi, I use that in quotes, incidentally, for a country which is unfortunately very naive in the ways of the world, and instead
I wouldn't call...
Now, my point is, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, gentlemen.
No, ma'am. Not at all. That is a banal cliche beneath the dignity of a high-class broadcast like this.
No.
To forget about these homilies, was Jesse Jackson negotiating, or was it a rigged stage show where Syria, in order to humiliate the United States, gives the prisoner physically over to the one candidate for president who, if elected, would play the most hob, do the most radical changes to this America? The one who just doesn't want people to get well will say, oh, come on. You don't have to be a 5-year-old child in a movie with your mother to misperceive something. But I don't think anybody misperceived anything more germanely than that 5-year-old boy in the movie house with his mother. And he was even afraid of the dark. He wasn't used to movies. And on the screen, the lions were eating the Christians, and he started crying. And she said, hush, Johnny. He kept on crying. She said, Johnny, hush. And finally, he kept squalling. People around him began to complain. She said, Johnny, I tell you, hush up. Quit crying. He didn't quit. She said, Johnny, what in the world are you crying at? It's just a movie. It's not real. Why are you crying? And he pointed up there in the midst of his little sobs. He said, that baby lion on the side over there, he ain't getting none. Well, that's what I hope and what I feel became of Jesse Jackson's mission to Cuba. I don't think it had the effect that Jesse Jackson intended. The press is very fickle. What is it? The press is the sword. You live by the sword. How does the rest of that go? I think you know. The press, within 36 hours of this triumph, within 36 hours of the announcement that the prisoners were going to be released, and I love the way... Did you feel victim of a trap play? I'm glad I didn't jump. Well, I'm glad I wasn't on the radio then in order to have jumped, because I might have been sucked out of position when Castro announced he was going to release the Americans. I remember saying, Americans are easy. Americans are petty criminals. What about the Cuban political prisoners who can galvanize Cubans outside Cuba? And sure enough, he released some of them too, but they announced that later, sort of a 1-2 punch. Within 36 hours, the attention was not focused on what we were supposed to focus on, namely the great diplomatic wizardry, and I say that in quotes, of Jesse Jackson. We were concentrating upon, and I congratulate the media for this. See, it proves my theory. The media is not pro-left. The media is pro-media. They'll stop at nothing to get a juicy story. And what we had was a story of prison conditions inside communist Cuba. I'm so glad that's out. I'm a little bit depressed that it's been that way since 1959, and there hasn't been that much interest I am grateful to the Reverend Jesse Jackson for doing what I failed to do in 25 years. People are sniping at critics of Jesse Jackson. They're sniping at critics more than they're sniping at Jesse. And they're saying, oh, you're sore-headed because he achieved what the president couldn't achieve and what your American State Department couldn't achieve. I've even heard people on television call-in shows snipe at venerable reporters for being sore-headed because Jesse Jackson achieved what they couldn't achieve in all their trips to Havana. Now, Jesse Jackson achieved what I couldn't achieve, and that is make people, A, know, and B, care about conditions in communist jails. So I'd like to think that propagandistically we have what I want more than what Jesse Jackson wanted. What Jesse Jackson wanted, of course, was enhancement of his flagging political fortune. He is can you imagine what that Democratic thing would have been like without Jesse Jackson? We ought to give Jackson a medal. He has entertained us. He has kept our blood going. He has kept our nerve endings all a Pringle in this otherwise irredeemably dull political season. Jesse Jackson has turned the spotlight, and I hope the scorch light, on Fidel Castro's prisons. Reverend Jackson, blessed be the name of the game. I'm so glad that you were able to focus that attention inside communist jails. Well, my question for Jesse Jackson has nothing to do with anything of the publicized Farrakhan. I'll let the rest of you ask him that. He has been asked about that. His reaction makes me lick my chops for what's coming next. He has not, to any observing person's or any discriminating person or any sensitive person's satisfaction, really divested himself or really divorced himself, really separated himself from Louis Farrakhan's overt anti-Semitism. By the way, was this nation really locked into debate with itself over whether Louis Farrakhan... Gene Shepard laughed. Can you imagine Gene Shepard laughing right now at the excruciation this nation went through over whether Louis Farrakhan called the Jewish religion a gutter religion or a dirty religion? The Reverend Jesse Jackson, he apologized for that like I used to apologize to Aunt Margie when I was still angry and didn't mean it, but I had to if I was going to get any dinner. Well, the apology or the separation of Jesse Jackson from Louis Farrakhan was counterproductive. I mean, you don't have to be a political sentient to realize that Reverend Jackson just isn't all that angry at Louis Farrakhan. How angry is the Democratic standard bearer going to be at Jesse Jackson? I'll let you have it for a while now. But the one question I would ask Jesse Jackson is this. I don't even think Reverend Jackson realized that this was being flashed nationwide, and as far as I know, nobody else has picked up on it, so let me grab it. It's lying right there on the ground. When one of the Cuban prisoners was released, and of course television swarmed in, one of the Cuban prisoners was railing out against Castro's treatment of political prisoners and all prisoners and Castro's treatment of everything. And he was saying, you cannot get justice in a communist country. And Reverend Jackson said, well, I have a different point of view, but that's what's great about America. We can disagree. I don't think it's too much to ask of a man who's running for president of the United States to explain that other view. The political prisoner released from Castro's prison said, nobody can get justice in a communist country, and Reverend Jackson has another point of view? What does he know that I have to learn? I am retarded if Jesse Jackson is correct. What communist country can you get justice in? I do not mean for parking tickets and things like that. I'm talking about for what really counts, for the thing that Jesse Jackson is in, namely politics. Where do you go for justice in a communist dictatorship? I'm not calling Jesse Jackson a liar. I'm just telling the world what a liar I am if Jesse Jackson is telling the truth.
I spoke to some Cuban Americans in my neighborhood that I know, too. I would like to get back to you on that. They're the least overwhelmed by the media coverage Jesse Jackson had caught coming back. They thought that he was more or less very, not even naive, but ignorant to step up behind that Mr. Vargas, the political prisoner,
Yes.
and to make the statement which our media all picked up on, where Jesse Jackson said he had a right to say what he did, but he disagrees in America.
Yeah.
How can Jesse Jackson know from 2 days in Cuba compared to that man? And most of these men were all in there 20 years anyway or more, waiting to be thrown out of the country someday, so Castro didn't do no great big favor. He just held on to them as a propaganda ploy until some dupe came along. And I use the term dupe in the content that I saw Pat Buchanan on McLaughlin's group the other day use it. He said Jesse Jackson is a willing dupe of the third world, communists, and other anti-American forces in the world. Also,
Jesse Jackson's attitude is, I have made a statement on that, and I will not amplify on that. And now, if I were ever really trying to divorce myself from somebody, I would call friends at 3 o'clock in the morning. I would ring alien doorbells. I would stop strangers on the street, grab them by the collar, and say, my name is Barry Farber, and I don't have anything to do with Bruce of Kearney. You understand? I would separate myself if I felt like separating myself. I would not issue a peevish, grudging statement and then snap testily at a reporter who asked me about it the next day. Let me tell you what Jesse reminds me of, Bruce. Then I got to run.
okay.
There was a Southern preacher who was a real hellfire, hallelujah, brimstone, high octane all the way. And the elders of the congregation came to him and said that there was great rebellion in the audience because it was... some people there felt he was getting too personal. You know, there's a point when the preacher quits preaching and begins to meddle when he talks about the sins that you are committing. And they said maybe the collection plates would be a little bit fatter if the preacher sort of toned down his relentless attack on wrongdoing. So the preacher said, well, I'll try. And the next Sunday morning he came out, and in his sermon he said, ye who have sinned after a fashion must repent as it were, or be damned to an extent. And that's some of the flavor I got from Jesse Jackson's, quote, repudiation, unquote, of Louis Farrakhan.
But on the record, we have over the last 5 and 10 years a whole series of anti-Semitic statements that Jesse Jackson himself has made. Let me give you one statement. September 1st, 1979 column in the Los Angeles Herald Examiner, Jackson wrote, the scheduled heavyweight fight between John Tate, a black American, and Jerry Coetzee, the white South African champion, represents humiliation to blacks around the world. It is sponsored by 2 Jews, Bob Arum in this country and Sol Persnick of South Africa.
Where did you get that?
Same column.
Wait, where did you get that?
I'm reading from the Washington Post, Saturday, June 2nd, a 2-column story. Jackson again criticized as anti-Semite by Rick Atkinson, Washington Post staff reporter.
Let me stop. Okay.
In the same column, Jackson added, quote, there are tensions in the labor movement where blacks constitute large percentages of the workers at the bottom, but Jews dominate the leadership at the top, unquote. One more quotation here. April 12, 1973, the Colorado Springs, Colorado Sun quoted Jackson in his speech as condemning President Nixon's insensitivity to the poor as a reflection of his top advisors. Quote, 4 out of 5 of them are German Jews, and their priorities are on Europe and Asia, Jackson is quoted as saying. Of course, most of Nixon's top aides, including Haldeman and Ehrlichman, were not Jewish. Now, what if they were? What difference would that have made here? I'm just giving you 2 quotations, time and space. You know, one.
No, I'm glad you did.
You know, this business with Jackson, it's been really overkill because everybody knows what he is. He's a semi-ignorant demagogue who plays on the ingrained feelings, it seems, of blacks in America, and whites also to some degree. And at this point, we all know what he stands for. And of course, this latest incident with Farrakhan is just a replay of the Hymietown, this reluctance to distance himself. And when he does distance himself, he does it half-heartedly. So at this point, it's really nothing new. What I can't understand is what Mondale and the whole Democratic crew hope to gain from Jesse Jackson's endorsement. And that is what really leaves a sour taste in my mouth.
Are you, by any chance, from Germany?
Well, yes, originally, but a hell of a long time
When
ago.
did you get out, before the Hitler era or after?
Just about a year before it started.
Really?
Yeah.
Congratulations.
I got out, yeah, but not soon enough.
Well, yeah, I thought you were taking the position, come on, we all know what Jesse Jackson is, let's change the subject. No, but then you got to the point yourself without me even having to prod you. The question is, what does Mondale do about it?
That he's a real politician, an opportunist who will stop at nothing to get another few thousand votes, which are problematic whether he will get them anyway. It seems to me if the Democrats would say, look, we want no part of you, go and peddle your wares someplace else, they would probably pick up more votes. Because I never vote.
Oh, Jesse, it would not be the same without you. It would not be the same switchboard. It would not be the same response. It would not be the same night. Jesse Jackson, thank you for doing the job of stimulating our listenership that you have. I am in your debt. You have liberated me from a kind of a prison. Let me try an ultra-short form. The real villain of this story, I think, is the American who is so irredeemably stupid that he thinks Jesse Jackson has pulled off something that the President of the United States couldn't do, and the Secretary of State couldn't do, and Daniel Schur of Cable News Network couldn't do, as though it is some feat. You know, Ron had his try, Georgie Schultz had his try, Dan Schur had his try, and everybody failed, but Jesse Jackson stepped up, picked up the sledgehammer at the carnival, and rang the bell. You understand? People who fail to see that these are the worst dictators in the world, and we have some bad ones, deliberately using Jackson as a lightning rod to shock the United States and to embarrass the president. Whosoever can't see that should be forbidden from calling a talk show.
Yeah, please do.
You have just poured Chanel No. 5 over a very healthy skunk. You achieve a certain momentary fragrance, but it's a losing battle.
Yeah?
Okay, excuse me, listeners. First of all, what all the Cubans that I've spoken to, and me being one, let me tell what we think of what Jesse Jackson's doing. The best way I can...
I'm glad you started in Spanish, or I would not believe you were a Cuban.
Bueno, yo soy de Guantánamo Oriente.
Well, no, but I mean, your English is, absolutely impeccably American.
Oh, well, I've been here long enough. I came here in 1966.
Wow. No, I know people who came here 20 years before you do, who have an English accent, a Spanish accent you could cut with a rusty machete.
Well,
You're good.
My family in Cuba, they're still bilingual, so we always had English.
Okay.
But anyway, the only way I can express it is when Billy Graham took his trip to the Soviet Union, came back and said that there was religious freedom in the Soviet Union. I mean,
Or how about the National Council of Churches? You don't have to go back to Billy Graham.
I know, it's absolutely ridiculous. How can Jackson go to Cuba, speak to well, I'll just say Castro, even though that's not a good term anyway, speak to him, get a couple of prisoners out, and say, oh, well, we should improve relations, and he's not so bad, blah, 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 blah. And then even when a prisoner who's been locked up for 20 years, and he comes out and denounces Castro vehemently, and then Jackson just bursts into the fight.
Wait a minute. He didn't... First of all, you're right. That's like... as far as the Billy Graham statement, and even more to the point, the National Council of Churches, they should be totally reproached. That's like flying over the Mato Grosso jungle and saying, I looked down carefully and I didn't see a single snake. Now, if Jesse Jackson had merely glossed over, I would not have been as upset. Jesse Jackson, when that man on television said, you can't get justice in a communist country, and Jackson quickly said, I have a different point of view, but this is America, and you're free to say whatever you want. Wow, I want to know Jesse Jackson's other point of view.
I just a suspicion, but I think he's being paid.
All right, wait, forgive me, folks. Here he is again. I can't wait to see how you're going to turn this to Israel's disadvantage. Go ahead.
Okay, I think Reverend Farrakhan, the so-called Reverend Farrakhan, is being paid to discredit Jackson, Jackson's campaigns, and especially to discredit everything he said about the Middle East, and to blur the distinction
you think Farrakhan is a Republican dirty trick?
Not a Republican dirty trick. I was going to say, I never saw Arnold Forster or Nathan Perlmutter hand them an envelope full of money, but I think it would be in the tradition of the Zionists, because they've always financed anti-Semitic movements going back to the time Theodor Herzl wrote their Judenstaat, and that was before the turn of the century. They financed people like Gosman and Antonescu. They had the transfer exchange agreements with Hitler. And it's the tradition of Zionism to collaborate with anti-Semitic movements to make the Jewish population paranoid, to make them move to Israel to fulfill the Zionist goal of the Aliyah, or the Jewish people.
Said, Mr. Reagan calls himself a Christian. Well, with his program is not charitable, and I don't think he's a Christian, even if he calls himself one. So the tone of the campaign is being set.
Did we hear the voice of Geraldine Ferrara, or was she quoted?
No, I heard an excerpt. Just 5 minutes ago. That's what I was just enjoying your show and listening to it. But when that happened, I was infuriated and had to call. Because last week, listening in the afternoon to a talk show, esteemed attorney Melvin Belli, who has no pleasure for Mr. Reagan, in talking about the grand Supreme Court verdicts on the search and seizure law, said, if we re-elect Herr Reagan, and I just fell off my desk.
What else are they going to do, Monty? When have I ask you one historical question? When have we ever forget that I'm a running dog of the Wall Street oligarchy of atomic maniacs? Just answer the question. When have we ever had an administration coming up on the end of its first 4-year term with so little to shoot at as the Reagan administration?
Well, Mike,
had they given him a little more time to talk, he would have accused the Reagan administration of the slaughter of the 6 million Jews.
All right.
I've never heard anything like this.
All right, fine. A lot of people are saying that. A lot of people are saying the opposite. That's what I like about this town.
Yeah, but, he also used the same line when he was running for governor. I remember it verbatim.
I am just disappointed that he did not say the Democratic Party defeated the real fascist pigs of this planet, and now we will stand up for free men everywhere and defy the new repressors of freedom whose home office and tentacles around the world emanate from Moscow, the Kremlin. We will stand up to communist aggressors. Oh, if he'd have said that, I'd have gone.
Well, I don't think he would. I think so far, what has this guy really done in office?
Diga говорите на
You see, I taught that language. I say Kalispera in Greek.
Oh, yeah.
Daddy, I love you. I wish we had more Americans like you.
Good in anti-Semitism. You speak Serbo-Croatian, you speak Greek, and your name is Angelo. Where are you from?
I'm from Macedonia, I told you. I speak Slavish, I speak Yugoslavian, I speak Albanian, I speak
come on. Now, I'm going to hang up. It's not...
I speak Bisera Yiddish.
Yeah, I got to hang up. It's not going to be good for me to get this jealous this early in the afternoon.
To get you at night, I'd like to remind people, especially the media, it is not Governor Cuomo running for president. It is not Geraldine Ferrara or their ethnic or Catholic backgrounds. It is Walter Mondale. And I'll go on to my next theory. One, I've noticed that Geraldine Ferrara and Mondale have all of a sudden got religion the last week or so about the family and this and that. I never heard it in the campaign. They have stolen a page from Reagan's 1980 yearbook when he went around and campaigned on this. I mean, flattery is artificial in this case. I can't see these people going around campaigning on values and then looking at the Democratic Party for the last 10 years, the platform that they're putting up here. They won't tell the people. But, Barry, they cannot campaign on Ronald Reagan's promises to the people. This is just copying Ronald Reagan's last 3 years. I see Burt Lance was brought. That request that he made comes as such a surprise to everyone.
Every candidate suffers a certain kind of unfairness. Mondale is the dull candidate. Ronald Reagan is the Teflon president. It is not a nice game when you're in the middle. Now, Jesse Jackson has been called a lot more than the black candidate. I think the press has been very laudatory of Jesse Jackson. I don't think Jesse Jackson has a thing to complain about, given the whole body of treatment of him. Are you saying that if you can prove that the press treats him badly, then he's got the right to stand up and do something as downright un-American as say, I want black delegates to vote for me on the first ballot? You're supposed to deny you feel things like that. You're supposed to be ashamed when people read your little notes and catch you in the act of hoping things like that. You're certainly not supposed to stand up and say point blank. I can only think of sexual comparisons. You know, you're supposed to make the young lady think you're a gentleman. You're not supposed to say, look, baby, sleep with me tonight or you're not going to get the promotion. I mean, that's an awful kind of sexism and a crime. I think this is an awful kind of racism in a convention of one of our two major parties where one of the three finalists stands up and says, I expect, indeed I urge, indeed I demand you to vote for me because you're black and I'm black. Where is that taking America?
Well, I can understand.
You are not of that category. I'm not going to treat you like that. Let's take the speaker who comes to town and speaks at the college, and then he's invited by the president of the college to dinner, okay?
Okay.
He excuses himself, washes his hands, comes back to the table, and the 6-year-old son of the college president says, ha, 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 while you were in the bathroom, everybody said what a lousy speech you gave. Now, the college president can apologize for the action of the 6-year-old kid. But nothing, as Shakespeare said, all the perfumes of Arabia cannot erase that stain. That man will spend the rest of his life knowing that he was a flop in that town, that those people around that table thought that he was a bad speaker. An apology can't correct that. Now, certainly Jesse Jackson can apologize for making a remark like Jaime Town. And certainly people of all religions and even of no religion can, as you say, forgive. But we will go the rest of our lives knowing that in his heart, in his off moments, Jesse Jackson thinks of Jews as Jaimes and New York as a town dominated by those Jaimes, consequently, Jaime Town.
I agree with that, Barry. Simply.
An interest story. A disabled Polish athlete, an amputee, has defected from the Disabled Olympics in New York to the United States of America. Bert Knapp mentioned it. It was in the news just now. My prediction is it will not be in the news tomorrow. Question. Double-barreled question. You've had those. They're easy. If a disabled athlete from El Salvador had defected, A, part one of the question, would that athlete get more publicity than the Polish athlete is going to get? And B, why? You see, my suspicion
I think he was disingenuous because he spoke of family life when the 2 points he is stressing is homosexual rights and causing me to pay for abortions, which I consider murder.
Okay, thank you very much, ma'am.
Well, I say no, because it was a pack of lies. Reagan did not create unemployment. He stopped inflation. Interest used to be 20%. Now it's only it's much, much lower. And I say no.
Okay, thank you very much.
He should be redemptive and fire Farrakhan, who is on the board of director of PUSH, where he has been since October 1983.
That is a brilliant observation, ma'am. In other words, if he really means it, he'll go all the way. He won't go A through Q, he'll go A through Z.
He would never fire Farrakhan. He needs them because Farrakhan goes to Libya, gets some money. Also, when Farrakhan was in Libya last month and met with Gaddafi, during that period, Gaddafi was meeting with international terrorists. And the same day, this is according to Arnaud de Bourgeois, the same day he was meeting with Farrakhan, he met with the woman who's head of the Japanese International Army, what it's called, one of the terrible terrorists.
The Red Army.
The Red Army, yeah. So, also, when Farrakhan was on a program with Sandy Freeman on cable, I don't know if you ever see those programs, he told her that in 1985 and 1986 there's going to be blood flowing in the streets. therefore. Now, most people have said, what does Jesse want? Jesse has a radical mission. He has a rainbow coalition that runs from pink to red. Before he even went to Syria, who was there planning this thing with him? Barry Commoner, Paul O'Dwyer, a guy by the name of Odell, who's a Marxist-Leninist, Ron Dellums, who is a Marxist-Leninist, a congressman from Berkeley, who is for the birds, and Fauntleroy.
American, I am very embarrassed by both Geraldine Ferrero and Mario Cuomo. First of all, I don't understand why Italian-American politicians don't represent the viewpoint of most Italian-Americans. Ms. Ferrero, here's a woman who is a lawyer, and she uses such inane statements on Ronald Reagan, like he's a bad man, he's mean, he's unchristian. And then Mario Cuomo says he's for the haves and have-nots. What they're talking about is they want me and you to pay more income tax to support people on welfare. That's why he's mean and bad, because if he gives us these income taxes, then what has to be spent on welfare must go down.
Okay, thank you very much.
On the party platform, isn't it a little naive and perhaps hypocritical to stress the party platform so much in view of what happened after the Democratic Convention in the summer of 1980? And I refer especially to the plank that was adopted referring to the established status of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and that the United States Embassy should be moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
By the way,
Do you think it was right that despite that plank in their platform, about a week or two after that convention in 1980, when this plank was adopted, that Carter-Mondale administration abstained on the UN resolution calling for all nations to take their legations out of Jerusalem? And when they did that, if you recall, the vote, because we did not veto it, this resolution passed 14-0. Now, the question I have is, why did the Democrats have a plank like that, and a week later, Carter-Mondale went ahead and abstained on that resolution?